The year 2025 will mark a bloody turning point. Not merely a war, but the battle that will decide the fate of all humankind. Jeane Dixon. There are prophecies that, when first spoken, are met with scoffs, shrugged off, and quickly forgotten. But there are others, buried beneath the dust of time, that continue to smolder like embers beneath the ashes of history. And when the moment they spoke of finally approaches, the world can do nothing but shudder. Jeane Dixon, the notorious prophet of the 20th century, the woman who accurately predicted the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the unexpected downfall of Winston Churchill, and even the global pandemic of 2020, left behind one final vision. And it is perhaps her most terrifying prophecy yet. In the year 2025, a catastrophic conflict will erupt between China and Russia. A war not driven by land or power, but by something far more terrifying. The power to rewrite the future of the human race. According to her vision, China will emerge victorious. But this will not be a victory to celebrate. It will be the triumph of a force capable of reshaping the global order, politically, economically, and even ideologically. And if her prophecy is true, then we are not merely entering a historic year. We are stepping into the final battleground of fate. In today's video, we will trace the haunting legacy Jeane Dixon left behind. The eerie images, the bone-chilling coincidences, and the predictions that may forever change how we perceive the future of our world. This is no longer a matter of superstition. This is a warning. And if you still believe everything happening is just coincidence, perhaps you haven't truly been listening to what the world has been trying to tell you. Chapter 1, Jeane Dixon, the woman who saw tomorrow. She wasn't a scientist. She wasn't a politician. And she certainly wasn't a prophet cloaked in religious robes. Jeane Dixon was, in every way, an ordinary American woman, born in 1904 in the state of Wisconsin, raised in a traditional Catholic family. And yet, from a very young age, something extraordinary had begun to stir inside her. A kind of intuition that no one could explain. A presence that made adults uneasy, and children instinctively keep their distance. At the age of just 5, Jeane repeatedly begged her mother to give her an envelope with a black border. Her mother refused, insisting such a thing didn't exist in the house. 10 days later, a letter arrived from a distant relative. It was a death notice. Her grandfather had passed away, and the letter came in a black-bordered envelope, exactly as Jeane had described. It was then her parents realized. Their daughter could see beyond the visible world. A few years later, while her father was away on a business trip, Jeane suddenly ran to her mother, eyes lit up with certainty. "Daddy's coming home, and he'll bring a big dog with black and white fur." Her mother laughed. No one had talked about getting a dog. But just a few days later, her father returned, with a large black and white dog, matching her vision to the last detail. At the age of 7, her parents took her to see a famous Egyptian palm reader traveling through California. The woman studied Jeane's small hand in silence. Then, without warning, she looked up, her gaze fixed, unblinking. "Your daughter is a prophet," she said. "She can see through time." She handed Jeane a small crystal ball and a piece of silk. And as Jeane held them in her hands, something strange happened. She turned toward the woman and whispered, "Be careful with the stove, you're about to get burned." Days later, the palm reader suffered a kitchen injury, just as the girl had warned. Not long after, while playing outside with her older brother, Jeane smiled and said, "You're going to be a famous athlete one day." Everyone brushed it off as childish play. But 10 years later, her brother would be recognized as one of the top football players in America. And so, her strange visions, once fleeting and playful, began to take shape into something far more serious. Something powerful. Something beyond her time. Some would call it a divine gift. Others believed she was connected to a force not of this world. But regardless of what people believed, one thing was certain. Jeane Dixon's predictions were impossible to ignore. warnings ignored, and the cost. In 1942, Jeane quietly approached famed actress Carole Lombard in a luxurious Hollywood salon. In a calm but unwavering voice, she warned, "Please don't travel by airplane for the next 6 months. If you do, your life will be in danger." Carole smiled politely and dismissed the warning. 6 days later, her plane crashed into a mountain. All 22 people on board were killed. The prophecies that shifted history. Throughout her career, Jeane Dixon came into contact with numerous high-ranking figures, including U.S. presidents. And for each of them, she offered a prophecy. A sentence that would leave its mark like a scar of fate. She told President Franklin D. Roosevelt that he had no more than 6 months left to live. He died shortly after, exactly as predicted. She told Senator Harry S. Truman that he would one day become president, which came true after Roosevelt's death. When Winston Churchill asked if he would be re-elected, Dixon replied, "No. Fate will shift." Churchill was furious. But a few months later, he lost the election. And then, the haunting of Kennedy. In 1956, Jeane Dixon published a prediction in a national magazine. A Democratic candidate will win the presidency in 1960. But he will be assassinated during his first term. At the time, John F. Kennedy hadn't even announced his candidacy. But by 1963, Jeane began having more vivid and terrifying visions. A dark cloud hanging over the White House. A black hand wiping Kennedy's name off a golden plaque. A strange name forming in her mind, one beginning with O, the second letter S, and the final letter curved like a hook. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Hours later, the name Lee Harvey Oswald appeared on television, matching the exact letters and form Jeane had described. From that day forward, Jeane Dixon was no longer just an eccentric woman issuing strange warnings. She became a symbol of everything science could not explain. A woman who saw the future. And reminded humanity of a truth it so often refuses to accept. Not everything is coincidence. Chapter 2, War Isn't Always Bombs. Sometimes, it's destiny. It will not be a war of guns. It will be a war of disease, of collapse, and of the soul. And it will pave the way for the great upheaval of 2025. Jeane Dixon, The Call to Glory, 1971. Not all wars begin on battlefields. Not all wars echo with gunfire or rumble with tanks. Some wars begin in a breath. In the dim silence of a hospital room. And they spread, not with banners or bullets, but through invisible revolutions that humanity never realizes it's a part of. Until it's far too late. In 1971, Jeane Dixon published her book The Call to Glory. It wasn't written like a novel. It was written like a warning. Among its yellowing pages lay a prediction that no one paid attention to. Until nearly half a century later. In the year 2020, a global war will erupt. But it will not be fought with bullets. It will be fought through disease. COVID-19, a prophecy fulfilled. When the world fell into the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic, everything came to a halt. Airports closed. Borders sealed. Economies crumbled. And millions of lives were lost, without a single bullet being fired. Many people, shaken by the silence of the catastrophe, turned back to Dixon's old book. And shivered. Was this the war she foresaw in 1971? And if 2020 was just the opening act? Then what awaits us in the second chapter of this unfolding tragedy? The year 2025. A bloody turning point, a war for the future, not just the land. Jeane Dixon mentioned 2025 repeatedly, in writings, journals, and private conversations. In her book My Life and Prophecies, she wrote, "The year 2025 will be a bloody turning point. A major conflict will erupt in Asia, between China and Russia. But it will not be a war over territory. It will be a war to decide who controls the destiny of humanity. At the time, no one could imagine it. China and Russia were seen as strategic allies. But perhaps beneath every handshake, a fire was already smoldering, one too dangerous to name. China will win, but what kind of victory is that? Dixon declared clearly. China will emerge victorious. But it will not be a victory of light. It will be a triumph of a force that will reshape the world in ways humanity has never experienced. And with that comes a terrifying question. If one power controls the future, what becomes of the rest of humanity? Victory does not always bring freedom. Some victories mark the beginning of total control, the severing of spiritual connection, and the slow erosion of the human soul. Have we misunderstood the prophecy? So far, no official war has broken out between Russia and China in 2025. But the world is witnessing something else. A cold, creeping conflict, spreading without declaration. China relations are deteriorating rapidly, in trade, technology, and military presence. China is expanding aggressively in Southeast Asia, escalating claims over the South China Sea. Russia and China, once aligned, are clashing subtly over influence in Central Asia, Siberia, and even the Arctic. Could it be that Dixon wasn't wrong in essence? Just misread in form? Perhaps the war she saw needs no bullets. Because the battlefield today is fought with technology, artificial intelligence, financial systems, data networks, and belief. A war of destiny. Fought in silence. We've grown used to war as cinema. Guns, tanks, explosions. But the war of the future may not look like anything we've seen before. In Dixon's vision, the war of 2025 wouldn't explode in one sudden blast. Instead, it would lead to a global shift in structure. Alliances would collapse. The world order would be rewritten. A new power would rise, one that would redefine truth and lies, right and wrong, freedom and control. This is no longer a question of who wins. This is a question of who gets to redraw the map of reality. And if Dixon was right, then we are not merely living through a historic year. We are living in the year she foresaw decades ago, a question mark hanging over the fate of humanity. Chapter 3, Was This the Sign? We are living in the year 2025. And though no bombs have fallen, and no declarations of war have shaken the earth, the world has quietly slipped into another kind of chaos. Subtle, silent, and no less dangerous. When Jeane Dixon warned that 2025 would be a bloody turning point, was she seeing a war without weapons? A conflict that would unfold not on battlefields, but across data streams, satellites, and hearts. The world is shifting, but in which direction? In just the first half of 2025, the signs have begun to surface. China has accelerated the deployment of its naval fleet in the South China Sea, constructing new artificial islands and imposing unofficial no-fly zones over the Spratly and Paracel Islands. Russia has begun restructuring its Far East strategy, forging closer military ties with India and North Korea, slowly drifting out of China's shadow. Meanwhile, the United States and China have escalated their technology war, tightening chip sanctions, restricting AI development, and forming data alliances to contain China's digital expansion. On the surface, no one has declared war. But beneath, the moves have already been made. Alliances redrawn. The old order, fracturing. A quiet epicenter, when war doesn't begin with a bang. The war Dixon foresaw may never involve trenches or tanks. It may lie in data dominance, in the race for artificial intelligence. In the struggle to control the thoughts and choices of every global citizen. And today, a question more chilling than ever echoes across this new battlefield. Whoever controls AI, controls the future. Whoever controls information, rewrites reality. Perhaps this is the true shape of the war Dixon described. Not a war that spills blood on the skin, but one that erodes the soul from within. The South China Sea is stirring, coincidence or fulfilled prophecy? In Dixon's other visions, and in several predictions from Asian sources, the South China Sea emerges again and again as the center of future disruption. And now, in 2025, Chinese survey vessels, unmanned submarines, and civilian satellites are operating at unprecedented frequency across the region. Reports from the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam mention unusual seismic movements beneath the sea floor, details not widely disclosed, but quietly monitored by international geologists. Independent researchers have detected magnetic anomalies and unexplained tremors in the area, but no official explanation has been offered. So what is this? Preparation for something bigger? Or just coincidence? A prophecy isn't a map, it's a mirror. Jeane Dixon never drew maps. She didn't speak in coordinates or political strategies. Her words came like oracles, vague, symbolic, and unsettling. But maybe that's the point. Prophecies aren't meant to spell things out. They are like fogged mirrors, reflecting the world back at us in a way only those willing to read between the lines can understand. And here in 2025, we are witnessing a reconfiguration of global systems, a restructuring of values, power, religion, and technology, a silent redirection of the global balance. Is this the war Dixon foresaw? A war not where the strongest wins, but where the one who controls fear and perception seizes the future. You don't need blood to know a war has begun. Sometimes, the greatest wars are not fought with armies, but with shifts so quiet, we don't realize we're already part of them. The rules are changing. The players are moving. And the battleground is already beneath our feet. Chapter 4, The Bone-Chilling Coincidence from Japan. When the final dream comes true, the world will never be the same. Tatsuki, prophetic manga artist. Not all prophecies come from psychics. Some arise from the most unlikely places. A manga panel. A dream. A trembling line drawn in ink under the glow of a midnight lamp. In 1999, a little-known Japanese manga artist named Tatsuki published a modest, self-drawn work called The Future I Saw. It was a short comic, quietly released with limited copies. But it carried something deeply unsettling. 15 dreams. 15 prophetic visions she claimed to have transcribed straight from her sleep, into drawings. She never claimed to be a prophet. She made no statement about having special powers. She was, as she said, just someone who dreamed, and drew what she saw. And yet, 13 of the 15 dreams have already come true. Dreams that became reality. Among Tatsuki's illustrated predictions were scenes eerily familiar to history. The 1995 Kobe earthquake, sketched before it ever happened. The 9/11 attacks in New York, with 2 towers collapsing into smoke. The 2011 Fukushima tsunami, drawn with haunting imagery, a submerged city, receding ocean waves, and white spirits floating in the flood. Each image, each caption. At first glance, they seemed vague, fantastical. But in hindsight, disturbingly precise. The final dream, July 5, 2025. And now, only one dream remains unfulfilled. Just one. July 5, 2025. A massive seismic event in the South China Sea. A new landmass rises from the ocean, connecting Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. The geological order is shattered. The map of Asia, forever changed. In that final drawing, Tatsuki rendered the sea red as blood. The sun, partially eclipsed. And across the panel, scribbled in bold, frantic strokes, were words that screamed. Run. Don't just watch. It's not an earthquake. It's not a tsunami. It's something else. At first, people dismissed it as fiction. Imagination. Paranoia. But after 14 fulfilled dreams, The last one no longer feels like a joke. A warning from someone who doesn't belong to this time. In 2010, a strange user appeared on a popular Japanese internet forum. The username was Cryptic, a man from the year 2062. He didn't say much. He posted briefly, then vanished for years. But the few messages he left behind still haunt Japanese netizens to this day. Before the March 11, 2011 tsunami, he wrote, "On March 11th, avoid the coast. If you live in Sendai, head for higher ground before sunset." 3 days later, disaster struck. Tsunami. Nuclear meltdown. Nearly 20,000 lives lost. His return, and the message for 2025. In 2022, the user returned. Same cold tone. Same concise delivery. Only one chilling statement. In July 2025, the South China Sea will not be calm. Prepare for something humanity has never seen. No one knows who he is. No proof of identity. No trace. But the terrifying truth remains. Everything he's predicted so far has happened. When signs converge from all directions. From Jeane Dixon in America, to Tatsuki in Japan, to an anonymous time traveler from 2062. They all point to the same moment. 2025. And the South China Sea. No one is connected. They don't share a language. They don't share a belief system. But their fragmented warnings fit together like puzzle pieces. Could it be that we've already been warned, but simply haven't been awake enough to see it? In the darkness of prophecy, perhaps truth doesn't lie in any one detail, but in the sheer convergence of it all. Why are all visions pointing to one date? July 2025. And if it's true, how much time do we really have left? Chapter 5, In the Eye of the Storm, a light emerges. There will be war. There will be chaos. But in the heart of that darkness, a person will appear, carrying boundless love and an infinite heart. This person will guide humanity through the shadows, and into the light. Jeane Dixon. Jeane Dixon's prophecies were not all drenched in doom. Beneath the thunder of blood and smoke, she left behind something else. A seed of hope. Delicate, yet unwavering. Like a final flame flickering in the cold night. In the final years of her life, Jeane repeated one message again and again. When the world descends into chaos. When humanity loses faith in one another. When disaster seems beyond redemption. Someone will rise. Not from power, but from compassion. This figure won't be a politician. Not a religious leader. Not a warrior. Jeane gave them a strange name. The instrument of divine compassion. They will come not with armies. Not with revolutions. Not with calls for vengeance. They will carry only one thing. A heart without limits. And the power to reconnect the broken threads between human souls. A reconciler between worlds. In the world Dixon envisioned, a world on the edge of collapse. East and West no longer understand each other. Religion and science are locked in violent opposition. Humanity forgets how to speak with kindness, and only the cries of division remain. And then, quietly, this person arrives, not to rule, but to reflect. Not to write new laws, but to remind us of something ancient we've lost. A new order, not built on control, but on reconciliation that begins within the soul. Who is this person? Dixon never gave a name. No nationality. No gender. No appearance. Only one image remains in her notes. A person stands amid a sea of collapse. Yet their eyes shine as if they have never stopped believing. Some believe this is merely symbolic. But others say it may point to someone real. A modern-day Messiah. Not here to create a new religion, but to reawaken the spiritual truth that has long lain dormant. A last hope, or the final test. There's something sobering in Dixon's words. She never said this person would succeed. The light will appear. But will humanity still have enough faith to walk toward it? They will not force anyone to follow. They will perform no miracles. They will simply stand and open a path. That path will only exist if we choose to walk it. Perhaps 2025 will be the year of upheaval. But perhaps, just perhaps, it will also be the year we are offered one last chance. Not to win, but to awaken. Not to control the world, but to return to what makes us truly human. You don't have to believe in prophecy. You can dismiss all of this as coincidence, exaggeration, or fiction. But if, amid the storm of 2025, you encounter someone who doesn't quite belong, who doesn't fear, who speaks little but whose eyes seem to pierce your soul, listen. Because just maybe, that is the light in the storm Jeane Dixon saw. Chapter 6, We Were Warned. But are we ready? No one can stop the storm. But who we hold hands with during the storm, that changes everything. Final entry from Jeane Dixon's journal. History has never been short of warnings. From ancient apocalyptic texts carved in fading stone, to black-inked dreams drawn into the pages of manga, to cryptic whispers from a stranger claiming to be from the future. We have always been warned. The real question was never, did we know? But rather, did we truly listen? Why do we always wait until the end? We see the volcano tremble, and still build homes at its base. We know the sea pulling back is a sign of a tsunami, and still stop to take pictures. We hear hundreds of prophecies, and still laugh them off as superstition. Perhaps what we fear most is not the disaster itself, but change. Because if the prophecy is true, then we must awaken. And awakening is often the most painful thing of all. Prophecy is not a sentence, it's a mirror. Jeane Dixon once said, "The future is not fixed. It's a stream. And every soul has the power to stir its course, if they are awake enough." Prophecy is not meant to trap us. It is meant to reflect. To show us what will happen, if we continue as we are. And what could happen, if we dare to change. What have we seen in 2025 so far? A world fractured in trust. Technology outpacing morality. Science severed from spiritual wisdom. And people, tired, uncertain, questioning even their own hearts. Could this be the very warning Dixon once foresaw? Is this chaos inevitable? Or is it a map, a guide, for those brave enough to look deeper? Choosing light in the dark. If someone were to bring light into this darkness, they cannot walk the path for us. They can only remind us that within each of us, there is still a flicker waiting to awaken. Maybe prophecy isn't asking us to fight destiny. Maybe it's asking us to be truly human when the world most forgets what that means. We cannot stop the earth from trembling. We cannot hold back the sea. We cannot command the sun to pause on the day of reckoning. But we can choose to hold each other tighter, to love more fiercely, to awaken earlier, and to stop ignoring the quiet signs that destiny keeps sending our way. You may not believe in Jeane Dixon. You may think Tatsuki was just a dreamer with a pen, and the man from 2062 just an internet hoax. But if 2025 is a test, then your awakening today is the answer. And if you've ever had a strange dream, a feeling you couldn't explain, a moment that whispered, something is coming, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Because perhaps, you, too, are a part of the prophecy the world is still trying to understand. We were warned. The only question that remains: are we ready? Subscribe to this channel to keep uncovering the mysteries the world has yet to explain. You are not alone in this journey. We'll see you again in the next chapter of history.